Hello and welcome to part 13 of 66 books. 66 short studies looking at the 66 books of our Bible. And you've reached 1 Chronicles, the book documenting the preparation for the temple. Like 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings before it, 1 and 2 Chronicles was originally one book. Also, like Samuel and Kings, the Septuagint divided Chronicles. Chronicles contains a different perspective concerning the same period of history that was covered by the Kings. Kings was written at the beginning of the captivity. Chronicles was written sometime afterwards. A prophet wrote Kings, but a priest wrote Chronicles. The name Chronicles comes from Jerome's translation of the Bible into Latin, called the Vulgate, which took place between 385 and 405 AD. The term chronicle simply refers to the recording of a sacred history. Thinking about the author of this book, the text of Chronicles itself does not identify the author. Jewish tradition says the author was Ezra the priest, and there is evidence that supports that view. Chronicles' story closes where the book of Ezra begins. 2 Chronicles closes with the Edict of Cyrus, that which summons the Jews to return to Jerusalem and to build the temple, and that is seen in the end of 2 Chronicles chapter 36. And then the book of Ezra begins with the same edict, but gives it more detail than it was given in Chronicles. Chronicles and Ezra, some think, have been one continuous story, a bit like Luke and Acts in the New Testament. Chronicles centers heavily on the temple worship and the priests. This fits with the fact that we know Ezra was a priest. That tells us that in Ezra chapter 7. Bible experts say Chronicles contains the same style and the same Hebrew word choice and is very similar to Ezra and probably uses the same sources. In fact, 1 Chronicles chapter 29 lists for us the 3 sources for the book of 1 Chronicles, and they're given as the book of Samuel the seer, the book of Nathan the prophet, and the book of Gad the seer. If we think about the recipients, the people for whom this book was intended, the first 9 chapters of 1 Chronicles starts with Adam and extends through to Zerubbabel, who led the first return of the Jews from exile in around 538 BC. Most of those who had returned had never lived in Palestine before and knew little of the temple that once functioned in Jerusalem. These were the people for whom the chronicler was writing. He wanted to give them a background knowledge about their country and their faith. In particular, he wanted to impress upon them that they were not just migrants living back in the land of their forefathers, that they were in fact a continuation of that pre-captivity nation whose life had been built on the twofold foundation of the Davidic dynasty and the Levitical priesthood. The subject of Chronicles is straightforward. The message is that when God is present, he is acknowledged and things of lasting spiritual value are accomplished. The structure of the book is fairly straightforward. The clue is given in the title. It chronicles the events that took place in Israel during the period covered by the books of Samuel and Kings, but Chronicles differs from Samuel and Kings in that the chronicler wrote for a people of a specific period with a clear purpose in mind. The literary structure of the first 8 chapters is easy, as each chapter begins with the phrase "the sons of." So the book in a sense divides into 2 main parts. The first 9 chapters talk about the preparation for the temple as it was laid out in the complete history of Israel, covering Adam to Abraham, Abraham to Jacob, Jacob to David, David to the captivity, then the genealogies of the 12 tribes, then Jerusalem's inhabitants, and then the family of Saul. And they're given approximately a chapter each in those first 9 chapters. Then the second part of the book, from chapter 10 to chapter 29, talks about the preparation of the temple and putting it against the background of the history of David. The purpose of Chronicles is to demonstrate the importance of the temple in the history of Israel. After the return of the remnant to Jerusalem, Ezra compiles the Chronicles in order to emphasize the importance of the temple and the priesthood in Israel's whole history. Yet it is not just the temple that has been talked about, the temple past and present. The temple in the present is shown to mean the very presence of God. So in summarizing the book in one sentence, Ezra wrote this book to the returning faithful remnant to demonstrate that in the history of Israel, God through David and Solomon gave his presence to them in the temple. In other words, the big picture is God is present with believers, and when they acknowledge him, things of lasting spiritual value are really accomplished.